Hello, and welcome back to one of the Ryan Bartel Foundation's parent panels. These are our monthly parent programs that we do to share resources with parents in different topics that may impact their teens' mental health. The Ryan Bartel Foundation is a youth suicide prevention nonprofit in Loudoun County, and we operate in the space that really teaches teens resilience and healthy coping skills. And along with what we're working with our teens, it's important for parents to have resources and a place to go if they have questions or want additional information. So hence we have these parent panels for you all. Tonight's topic is healthy relationships. And healthy relationships do play a key role in your youth's mental health, both in a positive and negative way. And so tonight's conversation is really going to be to talk about what is a healthy relationship, what are the things that you can do if you find that your teen may be in an unhealthy relationship, and understanding all the particulars of relationships, peer groups, friendships, romantic relationships, and things of that nature. So again, moderating for us this evening is Denisha Hamilton. She's done a few of these for us. Denisha is a Ryan Bartel Foundation board member and chairs our mental health advisory board. So I'm going to go ahead and turn over the program to Denisha.
Thank you, Val. So as Val mentioned, I have moderated lots of these conversations. I look forward to them every single month because I just think it's great to give resources and kind of normalize and validate what we as parents go through raising teenagers. It's a very different world. It's a very new world from when we were teenagers, cough, cough, not that long ago, but it's always nice to sort of just jump in. So I am a licensed clinical social worker and I own a mental health practice in Loudoun County. I specialize in working with teenagers and working with young adults. So that teen college age years, those are my happy place. I'm going to take a few minutes to let each of our panelists introduce themselves, and then we will jump into our conversation. So I will start with you, Colleen.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So my name is Dr. Colleen McDaniel. I am the Violence Prevention Manager at Laws. I've been there for about a year. My background is in sexual violence research mostly. And prior to being at Laws, I did research on sexual violence and some campus activism and prevention.
Thank you, Colleen. Lauren.
Hi, my name is Lauren Boyle. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I have a practice in Loudoun County as well, Nova Live Wellbeing. I work primarily with adolescents and young adults, but I also see children as young as 5. And I have been in private practice for about 16 years. And before private practice, I worked at Laws and had a similar position that Colleen had. So that's where I started after I got my master's. And Laws has a lot of great resources for so many things for the county as well. And this is my first parent panel, and I'm happy to be here.
And we are happy to have you, Lauren. So I will say this is an interactive conversation. If you guys have any questions or comments that you'd like to make, feel free to put that in the chat. You can send messages directly to Val or where all of us can see it. I will read out the question and then we will go from there. So first question that I'd like to throw out is, what is a healthy relationship? How do we define a healthy relationship? And Lauren, I'll pick on you since I made Colleen introduce first.
So when I think about healthy relationships, I think one of the things I think about is kind of the idea of boundaries. And my favorite one to think about is Olympic circles, where they kind of like go over each other, so that a healthy relationship, you have the part in the middle where people share maybe ideals, values, friendships, activities, hobbies, and things they enjoy. And then in the outside part of the circle is kind of where people are able to maintain friendships outside of the relationship or other activities and things that they enjoy. So it's very much where there's a lot of, joint interest, but then everybody still kind of has their own things. And when the circles start to eclipse each other is when sometimes that will be our signal that something isn't super healthy.
I love that. Yeah, I really love
the same thing. I think that visual is amazing. Go ahead, Colleen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with that. The thing that I think I would add to is thinking about equality as being in the center of a relationship. So how, treating each other with respect and equality above all else, and not struggling to, see who's better than the other, but finding what your interests are and then also maintaining your independence. That's the perfect visual.
Agreed. That will live in my head forever, Lauren. Thank you.
Perfect.
I'm like, that's it.
Why is it important to teen mental health to have healthy relationships?
I think that for teens, because so much of their lives revolve around friendships and social situations, that if one of our kids or teenagers is involved in an unhealthy dating relationship or an unhealthy friendship, it can have such an impact on their self-worth and self-esteem and their day-to-day being. And so I think there's so much value in having those healthy friendships and relationships to help build self-esteem as opposed to kind of pull it down.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think those, when we talk about healthy relationships, I think we often think only about dating relationships, but teens do have such a wide range of relationships in their lives. And, I think we often think about kids as just adults in training, but they are such full beings, especially when they're teenagers. They're learning and growing and changing so much. And so having that network of support is so vital to every aspect of their development.
Can we talk about some of the impacts of unhealthy relationships on our teens? Like, what are some of the things as a parent we should look out for that would cue us that our child may be in an unhealthy, either romantic relationship or friendship?
I think it's like a lot of other things when we think about teens' overall mental health and well-being, is that if we see any changes, there's a change in sleep pattern, a change in what their eating habits might be, if they've had a shift in friend group, if they're in a dating relationship, perhaps you're noticing their friends aren't, coming over to the house as much, or, that they're starting, our teens are starting to have interest in different things than they used to, or maybe they're not spending as much time as they used to out of their room. So any of those kinds of changes could signal that something's going on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And noticing how they interact with others, because at the core of dating violence is power and control. And so noticing when they're not feeling in control of their own lives, or they're conforming to how they think their partner or their friends want them to be, those changes are really vital, especially if they're not aligned with how they typically are, or they don't seem like they're joyful in themselves or feeling like themselves.
So I will put myself in the role of a parent and ask this question now. What do we do when we see that? Because we know teenagers can be a little angsty, don't really want to have these conversations. So how do we bring to their awareness that we see these changes, even if they may not be aware of these changes?
Oh, Lauren, I think you're muted.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think I'd be used to this by now. Something that I like to suggest with parents that I also use with my own children is I do a lot of wondering. So if I notice something, I'll kind of be like, so I'm wondering, I haven't seen so-and-so in a while, or, I'm wondering, it seems like you've kind of been staying up later, or, things like that, and kind of ask it in the wondering way. I think a lot of times that will bring down the defenses a little bit. And then I think in general, building communication so that when things do change, your kids feel like they can chat with you. And I think one of the cornerstones to open communication is listening and validating first, and then following up with opinions and or suggestions second. And then I think over time, kids are more likely to come to us if they feel like they're going to get no judgment at the start at a minimum, and then they're more likely to keep coming. So I think if you can build that just overall, then when we see changes, hopefully their kids are going to be a little bit more receptive.
Yeah, absolutely. Coming from that judgment-free space is so important. And we actually see this a lot with survivors of dating and domestic violence, that when we come from a place of judgment, not only do we reinforce the shame that people are already feeling when they're experiencing abuse or violence, but we also can put them on the defense to then feel like they need to defend the person that is causing harm against them. And so if we come in that space, then already we become the unsafe person rather than the person who actually is unsafe. And so coming from it, I love that approach of like wondering, and not, not trying to control, not trying to assert our opinion, but just to say, I'm flagging this for you because I'm worried about your safety and I care about you and I want you to be safe. And I love you, I'm your parent. Then they can see that you are a safe person. You are someone that they can come to free of judgment just to process through things. Because leaving a relationship that's abusive takes on average 7 times to actually stick. And, for teens, they're likely dating someone who is in their friend group, who's in their social circles. And so there can be a lot of social weight with that relationship. So just coming at it from that angle and being the safe person for them, I think is really key.
I completely agree. And something I would kind of add on in addition is that what you were speaking about, not wanting to increase the level of shame. I think sometimes too, as parents or people, if we come across as being judgmental when we're talking with someone about an unhealthy relationship, if there's already trauma there, sometimes we can end up creating secondary trauma. And so that non-judgment and validating piece becomes so important, so that we are not recreating any trauma that's already there or adding to it.
I like to encourage parents to approach these conversations from an investigative lens, like asking questions, jumping into their world, rather than making assumptions or giving your feedback, because, and I think, Colleen, you said it, this impacts their social circle. So it's so much bigger than just he or she is not good for you, so leave the relationship. And when we start to give advice that doesn't feel attainable, then we push our kids away. When it's, oh, that's difficult and really validating, that sounds hard. What do you think we can do? How can I support you? I also like to encourage parents, if you're not the go-to person for these conversations, don't take that personally. Make sure that your kid is talking to whoever that go-to person is. If it's the neighbor, an aunt or uncle, someone at your place of worship, just making sure that they have that safe person, because I've found that teenagers want to have these conversations. They're just so afraid of what the impact's going to be. Are you going to now hate my friend or my boyfriend or my girlfriend? So if I decide I'm not ready to end this unhealthy relationship, am I also disappointing my parent?
Yeah, and because especially when you are dating someone new, you probably want your parents to like that person. So it's going to be so much harder to disclose to a parent because they want your approval. Whether or not they show it, especially as teenagers, they're probably less likely to show it, but they probably do want it. You're someone that they look up to. And I was going to add to that as well. I think sometimes I get the question a lot, what if, to your point about I may not be the person that they come to, there might be someone else. And I often hear parents asking things like, how do I become the person that my child opens up to? I can ask them all day and they won't open up to me. And I think a lot of that starts with modeling the behavior yourself. So if you never share what your day is like with your child, if you never are honest with how you're feeling with your child, then they may feel like maybe they're not your safe person. So being able to model the behavior of just disclosing how you're feeling in different situations. Or I had a parent one time say to me, I like to tell my son every time something annoying happens to me at the grocery store, because when we're open with our kids, then they can feel comfortable being open with us in return.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And one additional piece about kind of that role modeling idea is, I think along with non-judgment and validation comes compassion. And as parents, when we show our children compassion, and or if we show ourselves self-compassion and we role model that for our kids, they're more likely to, I think, come to us, but then they're also more likely perhaps to show themselves some compassion and not judge themselves so harshly. So I think that role modeling kind of, across many different facets ends up being helpful towards building that relationship with our teens.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID on our teens, especially our younger teens, because so much of the developmental social skills that should have happened at certain ages just didn't. So can you both talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing on the impact of COVID on teens and their ability to form healthy or even understand healthy relationships?
I think something that I notice is, I think this is probably, in COVID, because there was more isolation and teenagers and pre-adolescents started using technology even more so than they already were. I think that it's been hard for some of the kids I work with to form healthy friendships or to even really know what that was, because there was such a long period of time where everything was done virtually or via text or over the computer. And so when they're in person sitting in a classroom, or they're sitting on a bus, or they're in the cafeteria, I think there's a lot of kids that are a little bit of a loss what to do if they're not communicating with that friend through some type of device. And so I think, with kids I'm working with, I end up spending a lot of time on just kind of basic social skills and, kind of knowing how to interact with someone in person, and about the body language part that goes with that, and looking people in the eye, and some of those basic communication strategies.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the same that we've witnessed at Laws with some of the teens that we work with. I think the other thing is healthy conflict has been a challenge for folks or for teens, because they didn't have those vital in-person conflicts as much during that time. And so they certainly were still having conflict with their friends. But like you said, they're communicating it over text, which is so disconnected and impersonal. And so relearning how to have healthy communication and what those skills are to, regulate their emotions in the moment when they're responding and not sitting there and thinking about what a text is going to say is a really important skill that I think will be a challenge, but I think kids can learn.
I think tone of voice is something that they missed a lot of during COVID years. And so I'll have a lot of teens that will say, oh, my parent yelled at me. And they didn't yell. They may have been stern or they may have been forceful, but their definition of yell and my definition of yell, definitely very different. But that tone of voice, they don't know how to read that or perceive that. Or if your friend is having a bad day and doesn't speak to you in the hall, that's not something you had to deal with during COVID years. And so now it's this whole new learning cycle that they're going through. And I agree with you both that our kids will figure it out. They will learn it. I'm just seeing that they're learning it a little later than what we're used to.
Yeah, and they're learning it in a really fast way, I think. That's really it probably my guess for the teams is that because they're learning it kind of all at once now, it just probably feels so much more overwhelming than when you get to do it, for years at a time.
Incrementally, I agree. And something else that kind of comes to mind too about the ability, and people overall are very resilient. Teenagers and pre-adolescents are very resilient. So I think absolutely they'll be able to catch up on those skills. And one of the things that leads to really someone's resiliency or ability to bounce back is to have an overall positive sense of well-being. And that is formed through healthy self-worth and healthy self-esteem. And one of the cornerstones of that for pre-adolescents is the people they're hanging out with, and adolescents, people they're hanging out with, and then also the activities and things that they're engaged in. And so that healthy relationship piece is at the core of that for self-worth and self-esteem often. And then having the positive self-worth and self-esteem helps with the resiliency factor. So it all kind of comes a bit full circle, I think.
Lauren, you mentioned the role of technology during COVID, and I know that burns on every parent's mind. So I do want to talk a little bit about technology, because I have said to so many parents, I think social media is not great in a lot of ways, but I also think that's the way that our teens connect with each other. And so when they don't have social media, they're sort of an outcast, but when they do have it, it opens up a really, really scary world. So how do we as parents help teens to navigate safely on through technology? And also, what is our role in checking how they're using that technology.
So I think ideally, if whatever social media app your kids are on, that you're one of their friends on those apps. I think that it can get a little tricky because teenagers are very savvy and often they'll create side accounts that we don't know about. So they'll have like the one account where mom and mom's friends are on it, and then they have like their other like underground account for other things. And so I think that trust and communication piece becomes really important, because hopefully if you've got that solid base, maybe your kids or your teens are going to be a little less likely to do that and not include you in it. But I think ideally, being their friend on social media and kind of spot checking from time to time on their phones. And, I think that I agree. I think having social media and having access to it is necessary for some of the social skills that teens develop. But it's certainly about finding that balance in the middle, and so that it's not kind of all or nothing. And I think that really comes with a lot of open communication.
Yeah, I like that's exactly it. I think there's a tendency to want to, control. There are so many options to control social media, but then also not. And so I think it's about it actually a really healthy way to learn consent and teach consent with your teen is to work out a plan together and agree, I'm comfortable with you doing this. I will not bother you about this, right? And so how can you come up with a plan together for how they're going to remain safe online? And then there's a conversation about, this is the risk, but also I want to be open to recognizing the benefits of social media for you. I'm like cuspy Gen Z, I'll out myself, and millennial, I'm like right there. So I grew up with the internet the whole time, and I'm a strong believer in social media because I used it coming up, and I was like in 8th grade when Facebook came around. So you can do the math on that, but it was right then, right in that really vital time of going into high school for me. And it was so important for me to make connections. And so I kind of have a visceral reaction sometimes, honestly, to the conversation about only the negatives of social media, which is why I appreciate the way you framed the question too, because there was so much connection that I was able to get through social media when, as a queer kid at a Catholic high school, I felt like I couldn't connect always with my peers. And so being able to find people at other schools and connect with them online was really vital for my mental health. So I think having that balance though of, I like the idea of I was always friends with my mom on Facebook and Twitter, so that there is that safety, but then also being able to agree, this is how you will use it. And it also teaches negotiation, which is a really important part of a healthy relationship.
And I appreciate you saying that, Colleen, because I did not grow up with social media. And so I think living your life very publicly seems very weird to me. Yeah. I was in high school when social media really became a thing, and I don't understand it, but I understand that it's important to the generation of teens that are coming up. And so figuring out what that balance is. And I know even with my own stepdaughters, it was one of those, I'm just going to jump into your world. I don't get it. And I don't know that I have to get it, but I'm going to jump into your world. And because I work with teens, I'm much more savvy than other adults. And I remember when my husband and his ex-wife found out that their oldest daughter had a Finsta, which is a fake Instagram account. And they both were like, oh yeah, we want to look at it. And I was like, you don't want to look at it. It's basically like their 5 closest friends, and they hate you, they hate me, they hate their mom, they hate life, they hate everything. You don't need to see it, don't do it. But it did open up a chance to have a conversation. And one of the tools that I used a lot with my stepdaughters was we would look at TV shows and movies, and we would just instead of making it a personal thing, I'm not attacking you, I'm not attacking your situation, but if you were in this similar situation, how would you handle that? And sometimes their answers were a little scary, and I would have to do a lot of deep breathing and taking a step back, because again, if our reactions are overreactions, it stops the conversation. But it was sort of interesting to see the way they viewed things. And then, our adult brains look at it very, very differently. I do want to ask as a follow-up with our technology conversation, I get a lot of teens that when we talk as adults about checking our teens' phones, it raises all kind of red alarms. It's, you're spying on my conversation. I'm divulging my friend's privacy. Like, you don't have a right to this information. So what does that balance look like of we want to keep our kids safe, but we also want to manage their privacy and keep them safe? And if we do see or hear something in their phone or through conversation, then what do we do that still respects that privacy?
I think that Lauren hit the nail on the head with, I just lost my train of thought with what you said. It was great. But earlier, so let me just back up. So I think really snooping is problematic. Oh, with the creating the other accounts, right? And you both talked about that, that teens will always find a way to create those other accounts and be, find their other spaces where you're not. And so that's something that we see a lot and hear about a lot, especially with like our child advocacy center at Laws, where, children might be who are engaging in problematic sexual behavior. Their parents, have gone through their phone and then it's really that they'll just find another way to be more sneaky about it. And suddenly they don't feel trust anymore. And we've now taught them that that's an okay behavior, which is really harmful and dangerous, because then that leads them to think, oh, it's normal for someone to go through my phone, which opens up a whole world for abuse, right? And so that's where I think the key of negotiation is is really vital and really important, and validating your teen, like, I trust you to follow these rules, and teaching them that they are worthy of trust is just so vital in that. And then again, that negotiation piece helps them learn how to set boundaries for themselves and then also, be safe. Yeah.
And I think to kind of continue, I agree with, those things that you said. And I think too that in terms of what I usually recommend to parents, what I found is helpful is to be honest and upfront about what it is you're going to be looking for, what it is you're going to doing. So as a parent, if you're going to occasionally go through their phone and you're going to maybe look at their text messages, I think I'm in favor of full disclosure. So, each parent needs to decide, what boundaries they want to set and what they want to follow up with. But as a parent, if I decide I'm going to occasionally go through your phone, I'm going to let you know I'm going to occasionally go through your phone so that there's not a surprise. Maybe you don't have to like it, but I'm going to do it. And then that informs what it is you would like to do or not like to do on whatever platform it is. Or, if I'm going to be, monitoring an app in a certain way, or there's some filter for certain words that come through. I think, again, for that communication and trust and negotiation piece, I'm in favor of full disclosure and not surprising or doing something that then where teens feel like we are sneaky is not the right word, but we're like coming in and they weren't expecting it. And so I kind of like the full disclosure thing. Hey, here's what I'm going to do. You do with that information what you would like, but here's, the things that I'm going to be doing. And then if maybe they're like, well, but you really have to do that, then maybe some of that negotiation comes in. And as trust builds, maybe you shift what the boundaries might be.
I think that was great, Lauren, because I do think that, again, we are their first relationship. So we are modeling what healthy relationships should look like. So that communication, I say this all the time with my clients and their parents I don't hide anything from my client. If you call me, if you text me, if you tell me something, I'm going to tell them, because how can we have a healthy relationship? How can I expect them to be honest with me if I'm not being honest with them? And I think that's very different than what I would guess most of us were raised of, like, well, I'm the parent, so just do what I said the way that I said it. But I think really, teenagers are much more savvy than we were. I didn't know that like talking back was a thing I could do. I didn't know that was an option, whereas they are very clear that that is an option and they will use it. But I think having those conversations of this really is for your safety. Like, yes, you're 13 and you think you know everything, but you actually don't. And I really like the way you said, Lauren, of those boundaries need to change and shift as your teenager gets older. I'm also a big believer in, I'm going to keep you safe, but there's a difference between safe and treating you as if I don't trust you. Because if you treat someone as if you don't trust them, then you create distrustful kids. I do want to remind our participants, if you have any specific questions or any feedback, feel free to jump in and send us something in the chat and we will get to that.
Nisha, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
So as a parent, if you have that agreement where you're monitoring, whether it's a social media app or texts or things like that, and you come across something that is, an unhealthy behavior, and whether it's bullying or an inappropriate relationship, after you kind of blow that gasket, because I think that that's mostly, what most parents would do is just, and then you need to approach the situation in a way that is non-judgmental and you want to help solve the issue, address the problem. What are those steps that a parent can take to have a healthy conversation with their teen about something that, they find on that device that is concerning?
I think that initially, as a parent, if you kind of have what may be seen as your teen is having an overreaction, I think once you've calmed down, I would take ownership and responsibility for that. I also think that's really good role modeling to see people, adults say, hey, you know what, I could have handled this a different way, or I apologize for, the way I reacted. And then from there, I think depending on what the topic is, but I think thinking about it in terms of like an educational kind of way, like kind of, what do you know about this topic, is finding out where they are and then giving them additional factual information in kind of just like a neutral, non-judgmental way. Because I think so often the topics that we may be thinking of are the sensitive topics. Teens might not really have the accurate information because they're getting it from friends or other social media places, or, and so I would much rather that they hear something factual from me, again, in like a neutral way, and then that can inform their decisions going forward.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The thing that I would just add as kind of an aside, but related is, it's, no parent is ever going to be perfect every single time, 100% of the time. And it's really not about being the perfect parent. It's about doing your best and doing good enough. There's a psychologist, and her name is escaping me, but she says, when it comes to being a parent, like, enough is good enough. And I just think that sums it up perfectly. So I love the taking ownership and modeling that behavior as well. I think that is so perfect, but it really is just about consistency.
And I would add to that, go in with questions rather than assumptions. So I saw this thing, I'm curious about this thing, please explain this thing, rather than this is wrong, this is bad, you shouldn't do this, why did you do that? I think, and I'm also a fan of taking that self-time out, of walking away and saying, like, I'm concerned and this makes me uncomfortable, so I'm going to go calm down because I don't want you to be the brunt of all my stuff, which is very hard to do in the moment. I will tell you, for a lot of my teens, especially my girls, they do find themselves in situations that they just don't know how to get out of. So you may see a picture or a comment, or they're agreeing to something that they have absolutely no idea that they have no plan on following through with that something, but they don't know how to say no. They don't know how to get out of it. And so they agree, like, oh yeah, I'll have sex with you. They're not going to have sex. They're just going to avoid that person like the plague when they see them. Mm-hmm. They don't know how to negotiate this conversation via social media or text. And so having those conversations rather than, oh my God, you're going to have sex. Like, no, okay, what's this here? What's happening here? Because most teens I have found want to be honest with their parents. They don't want to be sneaky. They don't want to hide things. They really just don't have the tools to know how to navigate some of these things that seem very common sense for us. So let's talk. I brought up the S word, so we'll go there now. So there's a very popular narrative that talking to kids about relationships, talking to kids about sex can be very awkward, and that we're kind of opening up a door for them. How can we have these conversations with our teens without it feeling awkward, without it feeling like, we're planting a seed?
For me, and what I kind of see and then also recommend and kind of practices, talking about it in a very matter-of-fact manner, like a factual manner, but just kind of putting it out there without judgment or inserting necessarily, at least initially, what my own beliefs or values may be about something, and kind of talking more in general and really focusing on that education piece, because so much things, particularly related to sex, our teenagers don't have the factual information. And I would much rather them hear the factual information. Again, then they decide what it is they're going to do about it. We can help guide them in that. But I'm definitely a fan of just kind of is, and chatting about it as if we were honestly like chatting about what you have for dinner. And I know that's maybe a little bit of an oversimplification, but the reality is it is possible to have those kinds of conversations. And it doesn't have to be, there's have to be embarrassment or shame or anything. It really can just be like yep, this is just is what it is.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think finding just those teachable moments rather than feeling like you have to sit down and have this big conversation with your teen, but rather just being open to questions. And actually, I think exactly that, when teens realize, oh, it's not a big deal to ask mom or dad or parent about this, then they're going to be more and more open every single time and more willing to ask those questions, because it's not this huge deal that has to be super uncomfortable. And then I always find I guess I would add too, there's always a developmentally appropriate way to talk about sex and sexuality in the body, because we have sexuality from the moment we're born. We have the body parts and they do the things that they're meant to do. And because sexuality is so all-encompassing of feelings and thoughts and attraction and everything, that there's always a way to work in, whether it's letting your child dress themselves as a toddler, through to as teenagers being more direct in those conversations. And even just checking in and asking, what are your friends talking about? Or, just making it normal.
Yeah, I love what you said about the developmentally appropriate way, right? So the way you're talking to a 5-year-old is going to be different than a 15-year-old. And, sometimes as a parent, you may wonder what really is developmentally appropriate, to be sharing or to be chatting about. So I think in those instances, it can be helpful to talk to other parents. If you're already working with a therapist or something, chat with them. And then I also think resources like laws, and there's so many other resources too that parents can access that are really valid resources that can kind of give some guidelines on, hey, your kid's 5 to 8, here's some developmentally appropriate ways to respond to a certain question, or your kid's 15 to 18, you're going to go a whole lot further in something, and here's some ideas. So I think as a parent, oftentimes we need to chat with other parents or talk with experts or seek out reliable information, so that gives us a little bit of an idea of where to go. And I also think it's okay to let our kids know that we don't know exactly what to say if they ask us something. If we're like, what, that's a really good question, I'm really not sure what to say, I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to let you know what that is. And that kind of again goes to role modeling, that it's okay not to have the answer right away for something, and to know that even as adults, sometimes we need to go and figure something out and ask for help from peers or things, other people.
I really like this theme of transparency and ownership of your feelings, because I think that really is at the core of so much of what we're talking about, modeling what we want our kids to do and showing that we, even as adults, have those same concerns and fears and things like that. I do want to shift a little bit. I'm looking at the time. Can we talk a little bit about dating violence? because we know that it happens. We know that it's hidden a lot. And so how can we as parents, one, notice or even pay attention if our child is a victim or a perpetrator of dating violence? And then what do we do when we find out?
It's I feel like this should
A
go.
heavy one, Colleen.
Yeah, I was like, I feel like I should jump in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Colleen, you go. You're on the front lines right now with that. So this is you.
Oh man, I talk about this for hours every day. Yeah, man. So yes, I think I would tie us first back into what we talked about at the beginning, even of this, where we talked about what are those changes in your child that you're seeing, because that's where you're going to start to notice if they're withdrawing, if their friends aren't around, or if other people are acting strangely around them. Like I like that you mentioned, because we don't want to think about our own child as someone causing harm to another person. I think as parents, it's so important that no matter what is going on in our child's lives, that we're taking care of ourselves first, because the metaphor that I always use is like when you're sitting on a plane, you have to put on your own oxygen mask first before you can put on your child's. And so we all likely have our own trauma and our own healing that we need to do. And so before we can really even jump in to talk to our child, if we suspect that they're experiencing abuse, then you don't have to be completely healed, but it is good to be aware of what's going on in our own minds and our own bodies, because otherwise we're just not going to have the capacity to support them in the way that we want. From there, I think it's the same thing that we've been saying. I mean, it's the same messages of, coming from a place of non-judgment, flagging behavior, not putting them on the defense, but just reminding them that you care about them and you're concerned about their safety. And that's why you just want to point it out and check to see what's going on. And then connecting your child with, a place like Laws is, I think, always going to be wonderful as well, once they're ready to get to that space, or if it's escalated, certainly. But at any point, they're welcome to come to Laws, because we can work with them to, learn about their relationship and help them process and decide what they want to do. I think the hardest part when someone that we love is going through abuse is just feeling out of control ourselves. And ultimately it is 100% up to that person, even though they're a teen, to decide what they're going to do. The worst thing we can do is try and control, because they're already feeling that control. And so we don't want to push them away. We don't want to add to that shame. We don't want to re-traumatize, all of these things that we said earlier.
Certainly, I think you did a great job kind of summing up what is a very large, topic, and to kind of follow up with that too. Something I notice when I'm working with my teenage clients, if they're talking with me and they're sensing that there's something unhealthy about a friendship or a dating relationship that's going on, and, kind of do some education around it, or maybe use the power and control wheel, and, and also look at, equality within relationships. But I found that when I kind of give them the space to be like, yeah, it seems like you've noticed some of those things, but, it really is up to you to decide what you want to do with it. It seems like they arrive at the answer they need to arrive at for themselves a whole lot faster than if I were, and obviously as in therapy session, I wouldn't do this, but I would say the same for parents, that if I were to tell you what to do, it seems like it takes a whole lot longer for someone to arrive where they would like to arrive than if you open that space up for them to get there when they're really ready to do that. And so I think we actually can help speed the process up for someone, which is a really hard process, by not pushing and not trying to control.
I really appreciate both of you saying that, because I think that's such an important piece, that you're to not put your own agenda on someone else, even when you can see the writing on the wall. It's like watching a train wreck and you're like, I know how to stop this train wreck if you would just listen. But It's also remembering that teenagers are trying to figure out their own identity, and this is how we're helping them to find where their boundary is and to define these healthy relationships for themselves, because like Lauren mentioned, they do know it. And I think, Colleen, you mentioned earlier that the more we push and the more we say, oh, this isn't a good friendship, this isn't a good relationship, the more they want to hold on to that person. And so what I would recommend in that time is really working on you, finding what that support looks like for you, because it's difficult. It's heartbreaking, it's uncomfortable. And so rather than putting that on your team to take care of that piece of you, you want to make sure that you're getting your own help and support during that time.
Absolutely. And something else, from working with teens and then, in my own life, being around preteens and teens, is certainly, with a dating relationship, there can certainly, there can be unhealthy components to that, or there can be dating violence. And while in friendships, I haven't noticed the violence piece so much, there can be some really unhealthy friendships that people have with someone that they aren't dating that can have as big of an impact sometimes, if not more, because if it's one person in their friend group and it's hard to move away from that person, because then it's going to impact your whole friend group. I'd say a lot with teenagers, I probably end up speaking with them more. They bring up the unhealthy friendship dynamic, even sometimes more so than the dating dynamic.
I
would agree with that, Lauren. Colleen might not agree with us, but I would agree with that.
No, I actually do. I actually fully do. Because I think I think the emotional abuse piece is there, and we especially, I think we especially see it with girls because the way that girls are raised to be competitive with each other, and yeah, and it gets really, really awful, and they just know exactly how to cut each other down, which is, I think that's changing with this generation. I'd hope, but I completely agree. Yeah, and it, to your point, it's almost worse because they're in that friend group, and if you can't just cut out a friend in the same way that you can kind of cut out a boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever.
I appreciate you saying that, Colleen, because so often I hear parents say things like, well, just don't be their friend. There is a social repercussion that happens with that. And I don't know that we always give that a voice or take that into consideration. Just don't be her friend or his friend means the other 7 people in that group are also not going to be your friend. And so it's not just going to be, I'm going to lose 1 friend, I'm going to lose 8 friends. And, with technology, phones, things like that, the bullying, the emotional abuse, the mean doesn't stop at school. It's on your phone. There are people that will text, and it just becomes so much bigger. So I say that because I think it's just important, again, to jump into their shoes and to give them advice that they can actually use, so that we are helping them to shape their boundaries, to understand healthy relationships, to understand okay, you don't have to be her best friend or his best friend, but how can we change this dynamic a little bit? So maybe you don't go over to sleepovers anymore because they're not kind to you, but you still eat lunch with them at school because you got to do that. Maybe you use me as an excuse when you don't return their call, oh, my mom needs me to do a chore. Be the bad guy. Give your kids permission to let their friends not like you. We do not have to be liked by their friends. And a lot of times, again, these are just giving them real tools, because when we say things like, well, just don't, that's not real. I don't know what to do with that if I'm 13. I would also say,
I think it's really important too, as you talk about these friend groups, that it's not just the teens, but then you've got the parental friend groups that are also involved. And I think that also adds a really interesting dynamic to, those toxic relationships where there's also parents, our friends are involved too. So it certainly adds a complexity to that friendship and to that dynamic.
So Val, without reminding me, I'm going to remind everyone that we're going to send a survey in the chat, and it's very important. If you take just a couple of minutes to complete that survey, it helps us with grants and funding so that we are able to put on so many of our free or low reduced cost programs. So if you can take just a few minutes to do that, that would be great. Lauren, I'm going to start with you. Do you have any final words for our parents today when it comes to mental health and healthy relationships?
I think, well, I very much enjoyed being a part of the panel. Thank you for including me. And I think, probably at the core is trying to have as much communication and trust with your teen as possible, and that's going to help contribute to their overall mental health well-being. And so I think that communication piece is really, really important.
All right, Colleen, any last words of advice?
I think I would go back to what I said earlier, that, it's not about trying to be the perfect parent. It's about just consistency and doing your best. And just leading with empathy and remembering what you said, Denisha, earlier about, you are the first relationship that your child has. And so building that healthy, trusting relationship and showing them the type of relationship you want them, you want for them, is just really key in their learning and their development as they go forward in life.
I'm actually going to piggyback on something you said earlier, Colleen, that it's okay to make mistakes. When we have these conversations, I never want parents to walk away feeling like, oh man, I've been doing this wrong. I've messed up my kid. I don't know what to do. Like, messing up your kid is part of the parenting process. Just go ahead and accept it. It's okay. They'll come see me one day. We'll talk trash about you, and then life will move on. It'll be all good. But the nice thing is that you are here tonight, which means that you want to add more skills to your repertoire. And I think the common saying over these last couple of years has been, when you know better, you do better. And so I always appreciate parents taking time to log on to have these conversations, because there is no right way. These are just suggestions, and then you have to tweak it for the kind of kid that you have. The kid that has the mean friend but is super quiet, so they don't know how to navigate these things. The super extroverted person that has a lot of friends. Like, these skills are going to look very different, and often, as a person with a sibling, often what works for one kid does not work for the other kid. So you've got to tweak that, and all of that is okay. Again, I encourage all parents to keep signing in and logging in for these discussions, because they're always fun. Val, I do not remember our topic for next month, but I'm sure you'll remind us.
Yeah, so August is going to be about transitions. So guiding your team through the transitions, especially as we're about to start school. So maybe it's the transition into middle school, the transition into high school, maybe even that transition into college. So helping navigate those journeys, and hopefully, giving them healthy skills to deal with those transitions for both, the teens and for parents. So we'll see you on August 10th.